25,000 feet above the Solomon Sea, the air was thin enough to kill a man in minutes. Inside the nose compartment of a B-17 bomber, the temperature hovered just above zero. The plexiglass bubble that formed the front of the aircraft was cracked in three places. Wind screamed through the gaps. Blood pooled on the aluminum floor, freezing as it spread. The bombardier's name was David Riley. He was 24 years old. He had been dead for 30 seconds. Then his hand moved. His fingers found the charging handle of the .50 caliber machine gun mounted in front of him. The steel was slick with blood. His blood. A 20-millimeter cannon shell had exploded against the nose glass 10 minutes earlier. Shrapnel had torn through his abdomen. The wound was fatal. Every man in the crew knew it. Riley knew it, but he could still see the Japanese fighters circling outside. He pulled himself up. His left hand gripped the gun mount. His right hand found the trigger. Through the shattered glass, a Mitsubishi Zero banked hard, lining up for another attack run. The red circles on its wings were bright against the blue Pacific sky. Riley didn't waste ammunition. He'd been taught to fire in 2-second bursts. Discipline over desperation. He squeezed the trigger. The gun roared. Hot brass casings tumbled past his boots. The Zero's engine cowling erupted in white smoke. The fighter rolled inverted and fell away, trailing fire. In the cockpit, 6 feet behind Riley, Captain Harlan Collier felt the recoil shake through the airframe. His left knee was shattered. A Japanese bullet had punched through the cockpit floor 20 minutes ago and destroyed the joint. His right wrist was broken. Another round had clipped it when he'd reached for the throttle quadrant. Blood soaked through his flight suit from the waist down. He kept flying. The control yoke vibrated in his hands. The bomber's 4 Wright Cyclone engines were running rough. Number 3 was trailing black smoke. The oil pressure gauge showed 0. It would seize in minutes. The hydraulic system was shot. No brakes, no flaps. The rudder cables were frayed down to 3 strands of wire. By every law of aerodynamics and engineering, the aircraft should have broken apart 10 minutes ago. It kept flying. Through the windscreen, Collier counted the enemy. 12 Zeros remained. They had started with 17. 7 were gone. Smoking holes in the ocean below. 3 for Riley in the nose. 1 for Kozak in the tail. 3 for the fixed nose gun that Collier controlled himself. That Collier had installed himself against regulations in a boneyard in New Guinea 3 weeks earlier. The Japanese pilots were confused. They had attacked a lone American bomber. Alone meant vulnerable. Vulnerable meant dead. But this bomber was fighting like a cornered animal. No, not an animal, a fortress. A flying battleship that refused to die. The voice of the tail gunner crackled over the intercom. Frank Kozak, 19 years old. He'd lied about his age to enlist. 6 more climbing from 4 o'clock low. Collier's vision was tunneling. The edges of the world were turning gray. Blood loss. He slapped his own face with his good hand. The pain brought clarity. He keyed the intercom. "How's Riley?" Silence. Then Kozak's voice again. Quieter. "He's back on the gun, sir." Collier looked over his shoulder. Through the bulkhead door, he could see into the nose compartment. David Riley was upright, swaying, one hand on the gun, the other pressed against the hole in his stomach. Collier turned back to the windscreen. He didn't wipe his eyes. There wasn't time. "All guns," he said into the intercom. "We finished the run. Cameras stay hot. We don't stop until we're over the coastline." No one answered. They didn't need to. The bomber was designated B-17 Flying Fortress, serial number 4, 1-2-666. The tail number ended in 666. Some men called it the devil's number. Others called it a curse. The aircraft had been condemned to the boneyard. Unfit for combat, too heavy in the tail, too slow, too dangerous to fly. Harlan Collier had pulled it from the scrap heap. He had rebuilt it, modified it, turned it into something the manual said was impossible. Now on June 16, 1943, he was flying it alone over the most heavily defended island in the Japanese Empire. He had volunteered for a mission that 12 experienced crews had refused. A suicide run, a mapping flight over Bougainville, 20 minutes of straight and level flight. No evasion, no backup. One bomber against an entire air force. The generals had called it a death sentence. Harlan Collier called it a job. This is the story of how a farm boy from Nebraska flying a cursed bomber that everyone said would kill him fought 17 Japanese fighters alone and won. The records called it impossible. The Japanese called it a demon. History called it the greatest single bomber action of the Second World War. His name was Harlan Collier, and before that day over Bougainville, before the bullets and the blood and the dying bombardier who wouldn't stop fighting, he was just a kid from Chapman, Nebraska, who knew how to fix engines. Chapman, Nebraska had a population of 347 people. It sat in the middle of farmland that stretched flat to the horizon in every direction. The soil was good. The winters were hard. The people were quiet. They went to church on Sunday. They fixed their own equipment. They didn't complain. Harlan Collier was born there in 1917. His father, Thomas Collier, ran a tractor repair shop on Main Street. One bay, one lift, one workbench covered in tools that had been used for 30 years. Thomas had learned the trade from his father. He taught it to his son. Harlan was 12 years old the first time he rebuilt a carburetor. He was 14 when he timed a 4-cylinder engine by ear. By 16, farmers were bringing their equipment to him instead of his father. The boy had a feel for it. Machines made sense to him. You could see what was broken. You could fix it. There was logic, cause and effect. No mystery. He graduated high school in 1935. The Depression was strangling the country. There was no money for college, no money for anything. Harlan stayed in Chapman. He worked in his father's shop. He saved what he could. At night, he read magazines about aviation, Popular Mechanics, Aviation Week, stories about the Army Air Corps, photographs of Boeing bombers and Curtiss fighters, machines that flew. He had a sweetheart. Her name was Lorraine. She worked at the general store. Dark hair, quiet smile. They'd known each other since grade school. In the summer of 1940, they talked about getting married. Someday, when there was money, when the world made sense again. Then came December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Harlan was at his father's shop when he heard. The radio was on, static and a voice from Honolulu. Japanese aircraft, battleships burning, thousands dead. The shop was empty. Thomas stood at the workbench, hands still. Harlan stared at the radio. The next morning, he walked to the post office. There was a recruitment poster in the window. Uncle Sam pointing. The Army Air Forces needed pilots, needed mechanics, needed men who understood engines. Harlan enlisted on December 10th, 1941, 3 days after the attack. His father didn't try to stop him. They shook hands on the porch of the repair shop. Thomas looked at his son for a long time. Then he nodded once and went back inside. Lorraine cried, not loudly, just tears. She walked with Harlan to the train station. Chapman didn't have much of a station, just a platform and a bench. The train came through twice a day. When it arrived, she handed him an envelope. Don't read it until you're gone, she said. He didn't. He sat in the train car and watched Nebraska roll past the window. Flat fields, empty sky. When Chapman was an hour behind him, he opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of Lorraine and a letter written in careful handwriting. The letter said, "Come back, I'll be here." He kept it in his flight jacket for the next 2 years. The Army Air Forces sent Harlan to flight training in Texas. Primary training, basic, advanced. He was a natural. The instructors noted it in his file. Calm under pressure, excellent spatial awareness. Mechanical aptitude, off the charts. He graduated in March 1942 with silver wings pinned to his chest and orders for the Pacific Theater. By June, he was in Port Moresby, New Guinea. Port Moresby was not a city. It was a collection of tents and airstrips carved out of jungle and swamp. The heat was a physical weight, 100 degrees in the shade. The humidity turned metal slick with condensation. Everything rusted, everything rotted. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. Malaria was epidemic. Dysentery was routine. The airfield sat on the coast, coral runways, metal Marston matting. The bombers took off before dawn and came back after dark. When they came back, loss rates were brutal. 1 in 3 aircraft didn't return. The ones that did were shot to pieces. Mechanics worked around the clock, patching holes, replacing engines, scavenging parts from the dead to keep the living airborne. Harlan was assigned to a B-17 squadron. The Flying Fortress, 4 engines, 10 machine guns, 13,000 pounds of bombs. It was the heavy iron, the backbone of the American bombing campaign. Tough, reliable, but slow. And in the Pacific, slow meant vulnerable. The problem was crew assignment. Pilots needed crews. Crews needed to trust their pilots. Harlan was 26, older than most of the kids fresh out of training, but he was new to the theater, inexperienced, and he had a reputation. He modified things. His first week in Port Moresby, he'd taken apart the supercharger on his assigned aircraft and rebuilt it with tighter tolerances. More boost pressure, more power. The engineering officer had found out. There was a screaming match on the flight line. Harlan tried to explain that the modification increased engine output by 12%. The officer didn't care. Regulations existed for a reason. Unauthorized modifications were grounds for court-martial. Harlan was removed from flight status pending review. For 3 weeks, he sat in a tent and waited for a decision. Other pilots avoided him. Word spread, Collier was trouble, a tinkerer, the kind of guy who thought he was smarter than the engineers at Boeing. Crews didn't want to fly with someone like that. Too risky, too unpredictable. The review board cleared him. Technically, he hadn't violated a direct order, just bent the rules. He was returned to flight status, but no crew would take him. So he wandered. At night, when the heat broke and the air was merely suffocating instead of lethal, Harlan walked the flight line with a flashlight. He looked at aircraft. He studied the damage. Bullet holes in wings. Shattered turrets. He saw patterns. The Japanese attacked from the front, head on. They knew the B-17's nose was weak. One small machine gun, 30 caliber. Not enough firepower to stop a charging Zero. It was a design flaw, a vulnerability, and men were dying because of it. He started walking to the boneyard. The boneyard sat at the far end of the airfield away from the active flight line. It was where damaged aircraft went to die. Some had been shot down and dragged from the jungle. Others had suffered mechanical failures on takeoff and crashed on the runway. A few had simply worn out. Too many missions, too much stress. Airframes cracked, wings warped, engines seized. They were stripped for parts. Mechanics pulled guns and radios and instruments, anything that still worked. The rest was left to rust under the tropical sun. Aluminum skeletons, ghosts of machines that had fought and lost. Harlan found it on a Tuesday night in late May. B-17, the serial number 4, 1-2666. It sat alone at the edge of the boneyard, partially hidden by jungle growth. Vines had started climbing the wings. The paint was faded. The plexiglass nose was cracked. 3 of the 4 engines had been removed. Stripped. The bomb bay doors hung open. Inside, rain had pooled on the catwalk. The tail number was still visible. 2,666. The last 4 digits. Some men would have walked away. 666, the devil's number. Bad luck, cursed. Harlan didn't believe in curses. He climbed into the cockpit. The seats were torn. The instruments were gone. Gauges ripped out, wiring cut. But the control yoke was still there. He sat down and wrapped his hands around it. The metal was warm from the day's heat. He closed his eyes. Imagine the engines running. Imagine the weight of the aircraft beneath him. Imagine what it would take to make this wreck fly again. It would take parts. It would take Timmenheim. It would take authorization he didn't have. But it would be his. No crew to argue with, no officers to approve modifications. Just him and a machine that everyone else had given up on. He went back to the boneyard every night for a week. He brought tools. He started cleaning spark plugs. He patched holes in the fuselage with aluminum sheeting cut from other wrecks. He reconnected wiring. He scavenged instruments. On the 7th night, a voice behind him said, "What the hell are you doing?" Harlan turned. A man stood at the edge of the boneyard. Flight jacket, captain's bars, older, maybe 45. Harlan recognized him, the navigator everyone called Old Frank, because he was twice the age of most airmen. "Fixing a plane," Harlan said. The man walked closer, looked at the aircraft, at the tail number, at the jungle vines Harlan had cut away from the wings. "That's 2666, the man said. "They condemned her 2 months ago, tail heavy, wallows in flight. Engineering said the center of gravity was off, unfixable." "Engineering was wrong," Harlan said. The man raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure they didn't try it." Silence. Then the man laughed, not mockery, genuine amusement. "You're Collier," he said, "the one who rebuilt a supercharger and pissed off half the officer corps." "That's me. They won't let you fly this." "They will if I fix it." The man considered this. Then he extended his hand. "Frank Romano, navigator, 42 years old. Every crew in this squadron thinks I'm too old to fly combat. You building a crew?" Harlan shook his hand. "Might be." "Then count me in. I used to work for Boeing, civilian test pilot. I know this airframe better than the manual does." That was the first recruit. The second came from the stockade. David Riley was in the brig for insubordination. Third offense. He'd punched a lieutenant who'd questioned his gunnery scores. The scores were legitimate. Riley was the best bombardier in the squadron. But he had a mouth on him and a temper, the kind of temperament that got men court-martialed. Harlan found him sitting on a cot in the holding tent. Riley looked up when Harlan walked in. "You lost," Riley said. "Heard you can shoot." "Heard you can't follow orders." Harlan smiled. "We have that in common." Riley stood. He was shorter than Harlan. Stocky, arms like a boxer. What do you want? I'm putting together a crew. Misfits. Guys nobody else wants. You interested? What's the catch? I'm flying a plane they say is cursed, modifying it in ways that violate half the regs in the manual, and I'm planning to volunteer for missions the experienced crews won't touch. Riley stared at him. Then he laughed, a short, sharp bark. When do we start? The charges against Riley were dropped 2 days later. Harlan had gone to the squadron commander. Made a deal. Riley flies with Collier or Riley sits in the stockade for 6 months. The commander took the deal. One less headache. The third recruit was the youngest. Frank Kozak was 19 years old. He'd lied on his enlistment papers, said he was 21. The recruiter had known. Everyone knew. But they needed bodies, so they looked the other way. Kozak was a tail gunner, the loneliest position on a bomber. You sat in a plexiglass bubble at the very back of the aircraft, alone, watching the sky behind you, watching the fighters come. You couldn't talk to the crew without the intercom, couldn't leave the position during combat. If the aircraft went down, you were the last one out. Usually you didn't get out. Kozak was good at it, calm, methodical. He didn't panic when the Zeros came screaming in from 6 o'clock. He just aimed, fired, adjusted, fired again. Harlan met him in the mess tent. Kozak was sitting alone reading a letter from home. Indiana, farm country, not so different from Nebraska. You got a crew? Harlan asked. Kozak looked up. Not anymore, Owen. Pilot got transferred stateside. Rest of the guys scattered. I'm building one. You in? What kind of plane? BR-17 modified. Boneyard rebuilt. Kozak folded the letter, slipped it into his pocket. Modified how? Extra guns, better firepower, especially up front. That got Kozak's attention. How many guns? 19. Kozak blinked. Standard loadout is 10. I know. A long pause. Then Kozak stood. When do I see it? They walked to the boneyard that night. All 4 of them. Harlan, Romano, Riley, Kozak. They stood in front of 2666 under the light of a half moon. The aircraft looked better. Harlan had been working. 3 engines were reinstalled. The nose glass was patched. The wings were clean. Romano ran his hand along the fuselage. She's got good bones. Riley climbed into the nose compartment, looked around. Where's the extra guns going? Waist positions get doubled. Belly gets 2 more. And here, Harlan pointed to the nose. Fixed mount, 50 caliber, aimed by the pilot. Riley's eyes widened. You're putting a gun on the pilot's controls. The Japanese always attack head on. If I can shoot back while flying, we even the odds. That's insane. That's the job. Kozak was quiet. He walked around the aircraft, checked the tail position, the gun mount, the field of fire. Finally, he turned back to Harlan. I'm in, Kozak said. They worked every night, after their official duties. After the sun went down and the officers stopped paying attention. They scavenged parts from wrecks. They pulled 50 caliber machine guns from damaged aircraft. They welded mounts. They rewired electrical systems. They balanced the weight. It took 3 weeks. On June 14th, 1943, they rolled 2666 out of the boneyard. The ground crew stared. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. Cursed plane, crazy pilot. It would never fly by him. Harlan climbed into the cockpit. Romano took the navigator station. Riley settled into the bombardier position. Kozak climbed into the tail. Harlan started the engines. 1, 2, 3, 4. They coughed, sputtered, caught. Black smoke belched from the exhausts, then the smoke cleared. The engine settled into a smooth roar. Harlan advanced the throttles. The bomber started to roll, slow at first, heavy. The weight of 19 guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition pulled at the airframe. But it moved, it picked up speed. The end of the runway rushed closer. Trees, jungle, the point of no return. Harlan pulled back on the yoke. The wheels left the ground. The bomber climbed, not gracefully, not quickly, but it climbed. It clawed its way into the humid air, shaking and groaning, but flying. Riley's voice crackled over the intercom. We're airborne. Kozak from the tail she's holding together. Romano calm, rate of climb is acceptable. Center of gravity is balanced. Harlan didn't say anything. He just flew. He felt the aircraft, the way it responded, the way it wanted to turn left but could be corrected, the way the engines pulled unevenly but stayed synchronized. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. They flew for an hour. tested the guns, fired bursts over the ocean. The recoil shook the airframe, but nothing broke. When they landed, a crowd had gathered. Mechanics, pilots, officers. Everyone wanted to see the cursed plane that had somehow made it back. The squadron commander was waiting when Harlan climbed out. The commander looked at the aircraft, at the extra gun barrels bristling from the fuselage, at the tail number, 2666. "You actually got it flying," the commander said. "Yes, sir." "Against regulations." "Yes, sir." The commander was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a folder, opened it. Inside was a mission brief. "There's a grouping job," the commander said. "Reconnaissance, Bougainville Island, solo run, mapping flight, 20-minute exposure over the target, heavy enemy fighter presence. Estimated 17 zeros within intercept range." He looked at Harlan. 12 crews have turned it down. I can't order anyone to fly it. It's volunteer only." Harlan took the folder, read the brief. Bougainville, heaviest Japanese defenses in the Solomon Islands. 1 bomber, no escort. Straight and level flight, no evasion. It was a death sentence. He looked at his crew, Romano, Riley, Kozak. They were watching him, waiting. "We'll take it," Harlan said. The commander stared at him. "You understand what you're volunteering for?" "Yes, sir." "If you don't come back, no one else will try. The invasion planning depends on those photographs. If we don't get the map, the Marines go in blind. Thousands of men could die. Then we'll get the photographs." The commander closed the folder, handed it to Harlan. "Mission is day after tomorrow, June 16th, briefing at 0400. Wheels up at 0600. "Yes, sir." As Harlan walked back to his tent, Riley fell into step beside him. 17-0, Riley said, "against 1 bomber. That's the job. We're going to die." "Maybe." "You sure about this?" Harlan stopped, looked at his bombardier. David Riley, 24 years old, best gunner in the squadron. Worst discipline record. A man nobody else wanted. "I'm sure," Harlan said. Riley was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure." They didn't talk about it again. There was nothing left to say. They had 2 days to prepare, 2 days to load ammunition, to check every gun, to test the cameras, to make peace with the fact that on June 16, 1943, they were going to fly alone into the teeth of the Japanese Empire. And either they would come back with the photographs that would save thousands of lives, or they wouldn't come back at all. June 14, 1943, 2 days before the mission. Port Moresby was an oven. The afternoon heat climbed past 110 degrees. Inside the maintenance hangar, it was hotter. No ventilation, just corrugated metal and stale air that tasted like aviation fuel and sweat. Harlan Collier stood in front of B-17 serial number 2666. The bomber sat on jacks, engines silent, bomb bay doors open. Around him, the ground crew worked. Mechanics pulled access panels, checked fuel lines, inspected control cables. Every system had to be perfect. There would be no second chances over Bougainville. But Harlan wasn't watching the mechanics. He was staring at the nose of the aircraft. The problem was geometry. A B-17 Flying Fortress carried 10 defensive machine guns, 2 in the tail, 2 in the waist positions, 2 in the top turret, 1 in the ball turret underneath, 1 in the radio compartment, and 2 in the nose. The nose guns were the weakest link. One was a .50 caliber on a flexible mount operated by the bombardier, effective but limited traverse. The other was a .30 caliber fixed forward, small, low velocity, designed to discourage attacks, not stop them. The Japanese knew this. Their tactical doctrine was simple. Attack head-on, dive from high altitude straight at the cockpit, close to within cannon range. Fire. Peel away before the bomber's turrets could track. In the first 6 months of 1943, 70% of B-17 losses in the Pacific theater were from frontal attacks. 70%. The nose was a kill zone. Harlan had spent 2 weeks thinking about the problem. Now he had a solution. He climbed into the cockpit. Romano was already there, kneeling on the flight deck, measuring angles with a protractor and string. The navigator looked up. "Center of gravity shifts 4 inches aft if we mount it here," Romano said, pointing to a spot on the cockpit floor. "That's acceptable. We can compensate with ballast in the nose." Harlan nodded. "What about recoil?" "Browning M2 generates approximately 11,000 foot-pounds of energy per shot. In full automatic, that's," Romano did the math in his head, 66,000 foot-pounds per second. The mounting structure will need to be reinforced." "Can it be done?" Romano smiled. I helped design the wing spar reinforcement on the B-17E model. This is simpler. They worked through the night. By dawn, they had a plan. By noon, they had the materials. Scavenged from 3 different wrecks in the boneyard. A fixed gun mount designed for attack aircraft, welding equipment borrowed from the maintenance depot, and a Browning M250 caliber machine gun pulled from a damaged P-40 fighter. The modification was unauthorized, completely outside regulations. If an engineering officer saw it, Harlan would be court-martialed. They worked behind closed hangar doors. The mount had to be bolted directly to the structural frame of the aircraft, not the floor. The floor was aluminum sheeting. It would tear apart under the recoil. They drilled through the decking, found the steel cross members underneath, and anchored the mount with half-inch bolts. 12 of them, torqued to specification. The gun itself was positioned to fire through the plexiglass nose just left of center. Harlan sat in the pilot's seat, tested the alignment. If he looked straight ahead, the gun barrel was in his peripheral vision. A targeting reference. Primitive but functional. The trigger was the hardest part. Bomber pilots had 2 hands full, left hand on the throttle quadrant, right hand on the control yoke. There was no free hand to fire a gun, so they rigged a switch. A simple button mounted on the yoke itself, positioned where Harlan's right thumb rested naturally. Press the button, gun fires, release, gun stops. Riley watched from the bombardier's station in the nose. That's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Will it work? Harlan asked. If the recoil doesn't crack the glass? If the mount doesn't tear loose? If the hydraulic lines don't rupture from vibration? If the electrical system doesn't short out? Riley paused. Yeah, it'll work. They tested it the next morning, June 15th, one day before the mission. Harlan took the bomber up alone. No crew, no passengers, just him and the aircraft. He climbed to 10,000 feet over the Solomon Sea and leveled off. The water below was blue, empty. No ships, no land, just ocean. He checked the bomb site camera, confirmed it was recording. Then he pressed the button on the control yoke. The nose gun roared. The sound was deafening. Even through the leather flight helmet, the noise was a physical blow. The gun was 12 inches from Harlan's head, firing 700 rounds per minute. Each round was half an inch in diameter. Each one could punch through an engine block at half a mile. The recoil hammered through the airframe. The cockpit shook. Instruments vibrated on the panel, but nothing broke. The mount held. The glass held. The gun fired in a steady stream, tracers arcing out over the ocean. Harlan released the button. The gun stopped. Silence. Ringing in his ears. Smoke filled the cockpit. He cracked the side window, let the wind clear it. He looked at the gun. The barrel was hot, glowing faintly, but intact. He checked the mount. No cracks, no stress fractures. The bolts were tight. It worked. He landed at Port Moresby 30 minutes later. Romano and Riley were waiting on the tarmac. Harlan climbed out. Didn't say anything, just nodded. Riley grinned. Let's load the real ammunition. To understand why Harlan Collier's modification mattered, you need to understand the mathematics of aerial combat, specifically the physics of closure rate, of convergence, of the split-second calculations that meant the difference between life and death at 25,000 feet. It starts with speed. A Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter had a maximum speed of 330 miles per hour in level flight. The actual combat cruise speed was slightly lower, around 310. But for the purposes of an attack run, the Japanese pilots pushed the throttle to maximum, 330. A B-17 Flying Fortress had a cruising speed of 180 miles per hour. Fully loaded with bombs and fuel, it was slower, maybe 170. But on a reconnaissance mission with no bombs, the aircraft could maintain 180. Now, basic math. If 2 objects are flying directly toward each other, one at 330 miles per hour, the other at 108, the rate at which they close the distance is the sum of both speeds. 330 plus 180 equals 510 miles per hour. 510 miles per hour translates to 748 feet per second. That's the closure rate. From the moment a Zero pilot spots a B-17 on the horizon to the moment of collision is determined by distance divided by closure rate. Visual range in clear conditions is approximately 2 miles. 2 miles is 10,560 feet. 10,560 feet divided by 748 feet per second equals 14 seconds. 14 seconds from first visual contact to impact. But combat doesn't begin at visual range. It begins at weapons range. The Zero carried 2 20mm cannons, Type 99 cannons mounted in the wings. Effective range was approximately 1,200 feet. Beyond that, the ballistics degraded. Accuracy dropped. A skilled pilot could hit targets at 1,500 feet, but it was a low-probability shot. So the engagement window began at 1,200 feet. 1,200 feet divided by 748 feet per second equals 1.6 seconds. 1.6 seconds of firing time before the Zero had to break away to avoid collision. Now consider the bomber's defensive capability. The standard B-17 nose armament was 130 caliber machine gun. The M1919 Browning. Effective range was approximately 600 feet. Beyond that, the smaller round lost velocity, couldn't penetrate armor, couldn't damage critical systems. So the bomber couldn't return fire until the Zero closed to 600 feet. 600 feet divided by 748 feet per second equals 0.8 seconds. 0.8 seconds of defensive fire. This is the tactical equation that killed American bomber crews. The Zero got 1.6 seconds of unopposed shooting. The bomber got 0.8 seconds to respond. The Zero had twice the firing time, and it attacked with cannons, 20mm explosive shells, against machine guns firing rifle-caliber bullets. The mathematics were brutally unfavorable, but Harlan Collier had changed the equation. The Browning M250 caliber machine gun had an effective range of 1,500 feet. Some manuals listed it as 1,200, but that was conservative. A well-maintained weapon firing armor-piercing incendiary rounds could reliably hit and damage aircraft at 1,500 feet. So now the engagement window shifted. The bomber could open fire at 1,500 feet. The Zero could open fire at 1,200 feet. 1,500 feet divided by 748 feet per second equals 2 seconds. 2 seconds of exclusive firing time for the bomber before the Zero even entered its own weapons range. And critically, the bomber fired first. This is more than tactics. It's psychology. Japanese pilots were trained on a doctrine of certainty. The B-17's nose is weak. Attack head-on. The bomber cannot hurt you until you are close. You control the engagement. But if the bomber fires first, if heavy 50 caliber rounds start hitting your aircraft before you're in range to shoot back, that certainty evaporates. Suddenly you are not the hunter. You are flying into a trap. Confusion replaces confidence. Hesitation replaces aggression. And in combat, hesitation is death. Harlan Collier didn't just add a gun to his bomber. He reversed the predator-prey relationship of aerial combat. He turned a defensive weapon into an offensive one. He made the Zero pilots question their doctrine, their training, their safety. The mathematics weren't just favorable, they were devastating. This is what the Japanese fighter pilots would discover on June 16, 1943. Not through theory, not through classroom instruction, but through the sudden, violent realization that the bomber they were attacking was shooting back, accurately, lethally, from a range they thought was impossible. By the time they understood, it would be too late. The mission briefing began at 0400 hours. The operations tent was crowded. Not with air crews. They were long gone already, wheels up on the day's regular bombing runs. The tent held intelligence officers, planners, photographers, men who needed the reconnaissance data desperately but couldn't fly the mission themselves. Harlan sat in the front row, Romano beside him, Riley and Kozak behind. The briefing officer was a major, thin, exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. The major pointed to a map pinned to a corkboard. Bougainville Island, a jagged volcanic rock in the Solomon chain. Japanese held, heavily fortified. Your target is the southern coastline, the major said. Specifically this sector. He tapped a section of the map. We need high-resolution photographs of the reef structure, beach approaches, and inland gun emplacements. The Marines are planning an amphibious assault for November. Without accurate maps, they'll be landing blind. He looked at Harlan. You'll fly a straight photo run, 20 minutes. Cameras will be on continuous exposure. You cannot deviate from course. Any maneuvering will blur the images. Understood, Harlan said. Japanese defenses are concentrated here. The major pointed to airfields marked on the map. 3 operational strips, estimated 80 fighters based on the island. Intelligence suggests they maintain standing patrols. Response time to an intruder will be 3 to 5 minutes. How many fighters should we expect? Romano asked. Conservatively 15 to 20. The tent was silent. The major continued. You'll be alone. No escort. Fighter range is insufficient for a round trip to Bougainville and back. You'll fly in at 25,000 feet. That's above the effective ceiling for most of their anti-aircraft guns. But it puts you in the optimal intercept zone for Zeros. He paused. 12 crews have reviewed this mission. All declined. I cannot order you to fly it. If you want to withdraw, now is the time. Harlan looked at his crew. Romano's face was calm. Riley was staring at the map, jaw tight. Kozak looked scared. He was 19. He had every right to be scared. We're going, Harlan said. The major nodded, handed Harlan a folder. Weather is clear. Visibility unlimited. Winds aloft are favorable. Wheels up at 0600. Flight time to target is 2 hours. You'll be over Bougainville at 0800. Mission duration is 20 minutes. If you're not off target by 0820, abort and return. What if we're engaged before reaching the target? Evade and abort. The photographs are worthless if you don't complete the full run. Harlan took the folder. The briefing was over. The other officers filed out. Harlan and his crew remained. Riley spoke first. 20 minutes, straight and level, while the entire Japanese Air Force tries to kill us. That's the job, Harlan said. We're going to need a lot of ammunition. They spent the next hour loading the bomber, 19 machine guns. Each gun needed ammunition. The 50 caliber weapons carried belts of 400 rounds, armor-piercing incendiary. Every fifth round was a tracer. The 30 caliber guns carried smaller belts, but more of them. By the time they finished, the aircraft was carrying over 10,000 rounds. The weight was enormous. The bomber sat low on its landing gear. The tires bulged. Romano did the math. We're 300 pounds over maximum gross weight. Will she fly? Harlan asked. She'll fly. She just won't climb fast. At 0545, they climbed aboard. Harlan in the pilot's seat, Romano in the navigator station, Riley in the nose, Kozak in the tail. The other positions, waist gunners, radio operator, were empty. Skeleton crew. Less weight, more ammunition. Harlan started the engines. One by one they caught, coughed, settled into a steady roar. He ran through the checklist, magnetos, fuel pressure, fuel, oil temperature. Everything was green. At 0600, he released the brakes. The bomber rolled forward, slow, heavy. The coral runway stretched ahead. Jungle at the far end. The trees looked closer than usual. Harlan pushed the throttles to full power. The engine screamed. The bomber accelerated. 30 miles per hour, 40, 50, the end of the runway rushing closer. At 60 miles per hour, Harlan pulled back on the yoke. The wheels lifted, barely. The bomber clawed into the air engine, straining. The trees passed underneath with feet to spare. Harlan held the climb, shallow, gradual. The aircraft was too heavy for a steep ascent. Slowly they gained altitude. 1,000 feet, 2,000. The jungle fell away below. The coastline appeared, then the ocean. Harlan leveled off and turned north, toward Bougainville, toward 17 Japanese fighters, toward a mission that everyone said was suicide. Romano's voice came over the intercom. Course is 015. Distance to target 420 miles. Estimated time en route 2 hours 18 minutes. Harlan didn't reply. He just flew. The sun rose behind them. The sky turned from black to gray to blue. The ocean below was endless, empty. Somewhere ahead, the Japanese were waiting, and they had no idea what was coming. The island appeared at 0753 hours. From 25,000 feet, Bougainville looked like a piece of jade dropped into a blue stone. Green jungle, volcanic peaks, white beaches rimmed by coral reefs. Beautiful, deceptive. 8 airfields were carved into that jungle. 15,000 Japanese troops were dug into those volcanic slopes. And somewhere below, fighter pilots were already climbing into their cockpits. Harlan Collier leveled the bomber, adjusted the throttles, checked the instruments. Airspeed 180 miles per hour, altitude 25,000 feet, heading 015. He activated the intercom. Cameras hot in 60 seconds, Romano's voice from the navigator station. Acknowledged. Beginning photo run on my mark. In the nose compartment, David Riley leaned over the Norden bomb site. Not to aim bombs. There were no bombs. The site was linked to the cameras mounted in the belly of the aircraft. Precision optics, high-resolution film. Every detail of the coastline would be captured. Reef depth, gun positions, landing zones. If they could fly straight for 20 minutes. If the Japanese let them. Riley looked through the plexiglass nose. The ocean was passing beneath at 3 miles per minute. Ahead, the southern coast of Bougainville stretched across the horizon. Clear, unobstructed, perfect visibility. Too perfect. Camera running, Romano said. Hold this course. Harlan's hands were light on the control yoke. The bomber wanted to turn left. It always did. Center of gravity issue. He compensated with slight right rudder. The aircraft flew straight. The cameras clicked, 1 frame per second, building a mosaic, a map that would guide 10,000 Marines to shore. 30 seconds passed. 60. The coastline grew larger. Details emerged. Beaches, tree lines, a dirt road cutting through the jungle. Then Frank Kozak's voice shattered the silence. Contacts. 6 o'clock low. Climbing. Harlan's stomach tightened. How many? Counting. A pause. 5, no, 8. Wait. Another pause. 17 fighters climbing fast. 17. The number hung in the air. Harlan had known it was coming. The briefing had predicted 15 to 20. But knowing and experiencing are different things. 17 zeros against one bomber. Time to intercept, Harlan asked. 3 minutes, Kozak said. His voice was steady. 19 years old and steady. They're coming hard. Harlan keyed the intercom to all positions. We hold the run. Cameras stay hot. Nobody fires until I give the word. No one responded. There was nothing to say. The Japanese pilots would be accelerating now, climbing through 20,000 feet, splitting into attack groups, planning their approach. They would see the lone B-17. No escort, no formation, just one bomber flying straight and level like a target on a practice range. They would be confident. 2 minutes. Harlan checked the fixed nose gun. The ammunition belt was loaded. 400 rounds of 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary. The barrel pointed forward through the plexiglass. His right thumb rested on the firing button. He could feel his pulse in his thumb. 1 minute. 16 o'clock high, Kozak called. Lead group diving. Harlan saw them. 4 zeros in a loose formation, diving from above and ahead, the classic frontal attack. They would come straight down the throat, cannons blazing, aiming for the cockpit, for the pilots. Standard tactics. Except the bomber wasn't standard. Steady, Guio, Harlan said, more to himself than the crew. The lead zero was committed now. Nose down, wings level, a collision course. The Japanese pilot was probably calculating range, waiting for 1,200 feet, waiting to enter cannon range. But Harlan wasn't waiting. At 1,500 feet, he pressed the button. The nose gun erupted. The sound was thunder. The recoil shook through the airframe like a physical blow. Tracers streaked out in a bright orange line, every fifth round burning, a stream of fire reaching across the sky toward the diving zero. The Japanese pilot had no time to react, no time to process. He was expecting a weak defensive gun, 30 caliber, short range, ineffective. Instead, 50 caliber rounds slammed into his engine at 700 feet per second, armor-piercing incendiary. They punched through the cowling, through the cylinders, into the fuel lines. The Zero's engine disintegrated. Fire erupted from the nacelle. The propeller separated, tumbled away. The fighter rolled inverted. No control, just physics and gravity. It fell past the bomber's wing, close enough that Harlan could see the red circles on the fuselage. Then it was gone, spinning toward the ocean below. The other 3 Zeros scattered, breaking formation. They hadn't expected return fire, hadn't expected the bomber to shoot first. Their certainty shattered in an instant, but there were 13 more behind them. Here they come, Riley shouted. The sky erupted with tracers, Zeros attacking from every angle. Above, below, the sides. They swarmed the bomber like hornets, 20-millimeter cannons hammering. The sound was continuous, a rolling thunder of explosions and impacts. A shell hit the left wing, punched a hole the size of a dinner plate. Aluminum peeled back. Fuel mist sprayed into the slipstream. Another hit the tail. The rudder shuddered. Control cables vibrated under Harlan's feet. Riley opened fire with his flexible nose gun. Sweeping arcs, a Zero banked across his field of fire. He led the target, squeezed, the gun roared. Tracers walked across the Zero's wing route. The wing folded, snapped. The fighter tumbled away, trailing debris. Kozak in the tail was firing short controlled bursts. Professional, calm. A Zero tried to attack from directly behind, 6 o'clock level. Kozak waited until it was inside 500 feet. Then he fired. The Zero's canopy shattered. The fighter peeled away, smoke pouring from the cockpit. But there were too many. They kept coming. A Zero dove from above. Harlan saw it, turned the bomber, lined up the nose gun, fired, missed. The Zero flashed past cannons blazing. Rounds hit the cockpit. The plexiglass windscreen starred. Cracks spread like spider webs. Then the instrument panel exploded. A 20-millimeter shell hit the altimeter. The gauge disintegrated. Shrapnel sprayed across the cockpit. Harlan felt impacts. Left leg, right wrist, pain, hot and sharp. He looked down. His knee was destroyed. The flight suit was soaked with blood. Dark, spreading. His right wrist was bleeding too. Bone visible through torn flesh. He couldn't feel his foot on the rudder pedal. "I'm hit," he said into the intercom. Flat. Factual. "How bad?" Riley asked. "Bad enough." Harlan tested the controls. They responded. Sluggish. Heavy. But functional. "I can still fly." A Zero came head-on. High. Harlan pulled the nose up. Tracked the target. Fired. The Zero's windscreen went dark. Blood. The fighter rolled left and dove. Out of control. 4 down. 13 still fighting. A Zero broke from the formation. Came at the bomber from 10 o'clock level. Beam attack. Trying to rake the cockpit with cannon fire. Harlan didn't wait. He turned into the attack. Lined up the nose gun. The Zero was closing fast. 500 feet. 400. Harlan pressed the button. The stream of 50 caliber rounds hit the Zero's engine nacelle dead center. The cowling exploded. Fire erupted. The Zero's prop seized instantly. The fighter nosed over and fell. 3 for the nose gun. The mathematics worked. The battle raged. Minutes blurred together. Harlan fired the nose gun in short bursts. Riley swept the forward arc with his flexible mount. Kozak protected the rear. The bomber flew straight. The cameras clicked, building the map, frame by frame. Then Riley screamed, not words, just a sound. Pain, shock. Harlan looked back, through the bulkhead, into the nose compartment. He saw Riley collapse, saw blood, everywhere, on the floor, on the glass, on the gun. "David," Harlan shouted, no response. A 20-millimeter shell had exploded against the nose glass. The plexiglass held but barely. Cracks radiated from the impact point, and the shrapnel had found Riley, his abdomen, his chest. The bombardier was down. Harlan couldn't leave the controls. Not now, not with 14 Zeros still attacking. He forced himself to look forward, to focus, to fly. 10 seconds passed, 20, then movement in the nose. Riley was crawling, blood trailing behind him. He reached up, grabbed the gun mount, pulled himself upright. His flight suit was soaked, red from the waist down. His face was white, bloodless, but his hands found the gun. "David, you're down," Harlan said. "Stay down." Riley didn't respond. He just racked the charging handle, aimed at a Zero banking across his field of fire. Squeezed the trigger. The gun roared. The Zero's tail section disintegrated. The fighter entered a flat spin, unrecoverable. 4 down. Harlan's vision was blurring. Blood loss. He blinked hard, slapped his own face with his good hand. Pain brought clarity. He looked at his leg. The blood was pooling on the floor. Too much, too fast. "Camera's still running?" he asked. "Affirmative," Romano said. 12 minutes elapsed. 8 to go. 8 minutes. Harlan didn't know if he had 8 minutes. The edges of his vision were turning gray. His hands felt distant, disconnected. But Riley was still fighting, bleeding to death in the nose compartment. Still firing, still protecting the bomber. If a dying man could fight, Harlan could fly. He gritted his teeth, wedged his shattered leg against the rudder pedal, used the dead weight to maintain pressure. His right hand was slippery with blood. He wiped it on his flight suit, gripped the yoke again. A Zero came from below. Harlan saw it in the corner of his eye. Inverted, climbing, cannons firing. Rounds stitched across the belly of the bomber. Hydraulic fluid sprayed. The pressure gauge dropped to 0. No hydraulics, no brakes, no flaps. Landing was going to be ugly, if they made it back. Riley fired again. The Zero's engine caught fire. It rolled away, trailing black smoke. 5 down. The Japanese were changing tactics. They'd learned. The head-on attack was death, so they came from the sides, from behind, trying to overwhelm the gunners, trying to hit the engines. They succeeded. A burst of cannon fire raked the number 3 engine. The inboard engine on the right wing. Cylinders shattered. Oil sprayed across the cowling. The propeller windmilled, then seized. Frozen. The bomber shuddered. Asymmetric thrust. Harlan compensated with rudder. The aircraft wanted to turn right. He fought it, held the course. "Number 3 is gone," he reported. "Can we maintain altitude?" Romano asked. For now, but not forever. 3 engines, full ammunition load, battle damage. The bomber was bleeding airspeed, altitude, life. The cameras kept clicking. Kozak's voice. "They're pulling back." Harlan didn't believe it. He looked. The Zeros were breaking off. Not all of them, but most, peeling away, heading back toward the airfields. Low on fuel, low on ammunition, or low on courage. They'd thrown 17 fighters at one bomber. They'd hit it with everything. Cannons, machine guns, and the bomber was still flying, still shooting back. They'd lost 5 aircraft, 3 more were damaged. Limping home. For the Japanese squadron, this wasn't a victory. It was a nightmare. The remaining Zeros made one last pass, half-hearted. They fired from long range, ineffective. Then they turned away. The sky was empty. Harlan waited, watching, expecting another wave. But nothing came. Just blue sky and scattered clouds. Clear, Kozak said. They're gone. The intercom was silent. Then Riley's voice. Weak, barely audible. Camera still running. Yes, Romano said. Good. A wet cough. Don't stop now. Harlan looked back. Riley was slumped against the bulkhead, still gripping the gun, still watching the sky, but his eyes were unfocused, distant. David, hold on, Harlan said. Yeah, Riley's voice was fading. Holding. The bomber flew on, straight, level. The cameras clicked, capturing every detail of the coastline, the reef, the beaches, the gun positions that would kill Marines if they weren't mapped, weren't neutralized. At 0818, Romano spoke. 20 minutes elapsed. Photo run complete. Shutting down cameras, Harlan said. He turned the bomber, southwest, toward Port Moresby, toward home, 400 miles away, with 3 engines, no hydraulics, and a crew that was bleeding to death. The flight back was not a journey. It was an act of will against physics. Harlan's left leg was gone. Not literally, but functionally. The knee was shattered. He couldn't move it, couldn't feel it. It was just dead weight. He wedged it against the rudder pedal to maintain directional control. His right wrist was broken. The bones ground together every time he moved the throttles. Every adjustment was agony. He stopped noticing after the first hour. The blood pooled on the cockpit floor. It mixed with hydraulic fluid and oil. The smell was copper and chemicals. Harlan's flight suit was soaked, heavy, cold despite the tropical heat. He was hallucinating. Zeros in the clouds. He'd see them. Diving, he'd reach for the gun, then they'd vanish. Just clouds, just shadows. He saw the runway. Clear, perfect. He'd start descending. Then Romano would say they were still 200 miles out. The runway was imagination. He saw his father, standing in the cockpit beside him. Thomas Collier in his work clothes, grease on his hands. He'd say something. Harlan couldn't hear it. Then he'd disappear. Romano kept talking, calm, steady, calling out headings, distances, keeping Harlan anchored to reality. Course 220, distance 150 miles, maintain current altitude. Harlan would nod, adjust, focus. Then the gray would creep back in. Kozak left the tail position, came forward to the cockpit. He looked at Harlan's leg, didn't say anything, just took off his arm belt, wrapped it around Harlan's thigh, tourniquet, pulled it tight. Stay awake, sir, Kozak said. Trying. Try harder. Kozak slapped him. Not hard, just enough. The shock brought focus. Harlan looked at the 19-year-old tail gunner, the kid who'd lied about his age, who'd fought like a veteran. Thanks, Harlan said. Kozak went back to the tail. The minutes dragged. Time became elastic, meaningless. Harlan flew by instinct, feeling the aircraft, the vibration. The sound. When the nose wanted to drop, he pulled back. When it wanted to turn, he corrected. Behind him in the nose compartment, David Riley was silent. Harlan didn't look back, didn't check. He couldn't handle knowing. At 100 miles out, Romano's voice changed. Urgency. Port Moresby on the horizon, 15 minutes. Copy. You need to prepare for landing. No hydraulics, no brakes. You're coming in fast. I know. The runway is 6,000 feet. At your approach speed, you'll need 8,000 to stop without brakes. I know, Romano paused. What's your plan? Harlan didn't have a plan, just an idea. A crazy, desperate idea that would either work or kill them all. I'll figure it out, he said. The coastline of New Guinea appeared, the Owen Stanley mountain range. The bomber was too low to clear it. Harlan advanced the throttles. The 3 remaining engines screamed. Oil temperatures climbed into the red. The bomber clawed for altitude, inch by inch. They cleared the pass with 50 feet to spare. Port Moresby airfield spread out below. Coral runways, metal matting, home. Harlan fired a red flare from the cockpit window. Emergency. The tower would see it, clear the pattern, prepare the crash crews. He lined up on final approach. The bomber was fast, too fast, 120 miles per hour. Normal approach speed was 90. But without flaps, he needed the extra airspeed to maintain control. The runway grew larger, closer. The fire trucks were already rolling. Ambulances waiting. Harlan cut the power. The nose dropped. He pulled back on the yoke. Flared. The main wheels hit. Hard. The bomber bounced. Slammed down again. The tires screamed. Rubber burning on coral. But they held. The bomber was rolling. Fast. Eating up runway. 4,000 feet remaining. 3,000. 2,000. No brakes. No way to stop. 1,000 feet left. The end of the runway rushing closer. Jungle beyond. Harlan made his decision. He slammed the left rudder pedal. Full deflection. The pain in his shattered knee was blinding. He didn't care. He held it down. The bomber began to skid. The tail swung right. The nose turned left. A ground loop. Controlled. Deliberate. The landing gear screamed. The airframe shuddered. But the maneuver killed speed. Friction. Drag. The bomber slowed. 50 miles per hour. 40. 30. It rolled off the runway. Into the dirt. Into the grass. Skidding. Sliding. And stopped. 15 feet from the jungle edge. The engine sputtered. Died. The propellers coasted to a halt. Silence. Harlan slumped over the yoke. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. Just to rest. He didn't hear the medics running. Didn't hear them prying open the cockpit door. Didn't feel them lifting him out. He was already gone. Unconscious. The body finally surrendering to blood loss and exhaustion. But he'd done it. He'd brought them home. The ground crews counted the damage. 187 bullet holes. 5 large cannon shell impacts. 3 engines damaged. Hydraulic system destroyed. Control cables hanging by threads. The main wing spar was cracked. If Harlan had pulled the yoke any harder during the landing, the wings would have separated from the fuselage. The bomber had flown on habit. On will. On the refusal to die. David Riley was pulled from the nose compartment. He was still alive. Barely. His hand was still on the gun. They had to pry his fingers loose. He died in the ambulance. Before it reached the hospital. He was 24 years old. They buried him with full military honors 3 days later. Harlan was still unconscious. He didn't attend the funeral. The film from the cameras was developed immediately. The intelligence officers worked through the night. When the images came into focus, they were perfect. Crystal clear, every detail of the Bougainville coastline captured. Reef depths, beach gradients, gun positions, everything the Marines needed. The photos enabled the invasion. 4 months later, in November 1943, 10,000 Marines landed on Bougainville. They knew exactly where the Japanese guns were. They avoided the killing zones, they struck at weak points. Casualties were 70% lower than projected. Estimated lives saved 3,000, all because one bomber had flown straight for 20 minutes while the sky burned around it. Harlan woke up 6 days after the mission. The doctors told him he'd never walk again. The damage to his knee was too severe. The wrist would heal, but the leg was finished. He asked about his crew. They told him everyone else survived. Kozak, Romano, the others. Then they told him about Riley. Harlan turned his face to the wall. The doctors left him alone. 2 weeks later, a general visited the hospital. He carried a small box. Inside were 2 medals. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States can award. One for Captain Harlan Collier, one for Second Lieutenant David Riley. Posthumous. The general pinned the medal to Harlan's hospital gown. Read the citation: conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Harlan accepted it, not for himself, for Riley, for the kid who'd kept fighting while dying. The war continued without him. The doctors were wrong. Harlan walked again. It took 18 months, physical therapy, pain, stubbornness. But he walked. He returned to Nebraska in 1946, to Chapman, population 347. He married Lorraine, worked as a civilian aviation mechanic. Lived quietly. He kept the Medal of Honor in a drawer. Never wore it, never talked about it. When neighbors asked about the war, he'd say he fixed planes. Sometimes he flew them. Nothing more. Every year on June 16th, he visited a grave in Indiana, David Riley's grave. He'd leave a .50 caliber shell casing on the headstone. He never explained why. His family never asked. B-17 serial number 2666 was never repaired. Too much damage. It was towed to a corner of the airfield and left. Years later, it was transported to the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, preserved, the bullet holes still visible. A plaque beside it reads, "The Fortress That Refused to Die." Harlan Collier passed away on April 15, 2003. He was 86 years old. He was buried in Chapman, Nebraska. Full military honors. The rifle volley echoed across the same farm fields where he'd learned to fix engines as a boy. The record stands. 1 B-17 bomber, 17 Japanese fighters engaged, 5 confirmed destroyed, 3 damaged, 0 American aircraft lost, 1 crew that refused to quit, 1 pilot who turned a cursed plane into a legend. The mathematics said it was impossible. David Riley said it was necessary. Harlan Collier said it was just the job. And 80 years later, the world remembers.